In this example, I noticed that something odd happened to the third stitch on the right needle. Where I should have one loop, there are 3 loops of yarn, so I clearly made a mistake. The loops on your needles are called live stitches. These loops have a right side, which is where my right thumb is on the loop, and a left side, which is where my left thumb is. It's important to make sure that the right side of the loop is on top of the knitting needle facing you. If the left side of the loop is on top facing you, then your stitch is twisted, which is not good. And you might notice when you try to insert your right needle into that loop, it's more difficult. So make sure the right side of the loop is on top of the needle facing you. To reach the mistake, undo the first 2 stitches on the right needle. To undo a stitch, insert the left needle into the loop underneath the live stitch on the right needle. So you will insert your left needle into this loop where my finger is poking through. Once the left needle is inserted into the loop, bring the live stitch that's on the right needle off the right needle and pull your working yarn to undo that stitch. Repeat those steps for the next stitch on the right needle. So insert your left needle into the loop that's below the top live stitch on the right needle. Once it's inserted, let the stitch on the right needle come off the top and pull your working yarn to undo it. Now we have reached the mistake, and something clearly is off because the working yarn is in front of the right needle when it should be behind. So I'm going to try and just bring this top stitch on the right needle off the top to see what happens. Now I can bring the working yarn back behind the right needle where it should be. And I notice that the working yarn is now attached to the second stitch on the right needle when it should be attached to the top stitch. So I'm going to move this top stitch on the right needle back to the left needle so that we can knit into it, and then it will be attached to the working yarn. Make sure when you move this stitch that the right side of the stitch is on top of the needle facing you. And now my mistake is fixed and I can keep knitting. In this instance, I dropped a stitch, which I can tell because there's a loop a few rows down, and when I count the number of stitches on my needle, I'm missing a stitch. So carefully remove your needle from the stitches. Then slowly and carefully pull your working yarn to undo the stitches. Keep undoing the stitches until you pass your mistake, and try to take them out all the way to the end of the row. The last stitch of the row is often tricky to undo, and you'll probably have trouble with it. In this case, I accidentally undid the first 2 stitches of the next row, but that's okay. Now we are going to place the stitches back on your knitting needles. So we'll start from the left. The stitch attached to the working yarn will be the last stitch placed back on the needle. We'll worry about those 2 stitches on the far right that I accidentally undid at the end. When putting the stitches back on your needle, make sure that the right side of the loop is on top. After you've put all the stitches back on the needle, starting from the left, stop once the top stitch is attached to the working yarn. Now we will place the other 2 stitches on our other needle, starting from the far right side. So again, when putting them on the needle, make sure that the right side of the loop is on top of the needle facing you. Now the stitches are back on your needles and the mistake is fixed. The needle attached to the working yarn should be in your right hand. So I'm flipping my project over, and then I can continue knitting those last 2 stitches on the left needle to complete the row.